struggle with, expecting a Warlock ban from his side, but instead opts to ban the Secret Mage away from Kin.
Yeah, I find it pretty interesting just by eyeballing the list. It seems like most of Odyssey's lineup would struggle against the Dude Paladin, especially that mage he's got. And the Quest Rogue as well would struggle against that kind of aggressive deck. But I guess you could say the same for Secret Mage, but I do feel like with what's left of his lineup, he would have a slightly better chance against Secret Mage than he would against Dude Paladin. So
yeah, Secret Mage will beat up on Quest Rogue more than Dude Paladin would, I feel. Secret Mage is one of the hard counters to Quest Rogue.
Yes.
But against the rest of his field, I feel like the Dude Paladin would be better. But it's hard to say, and it's very close. And I'm sure that Odyssey probably did the math with his matchups, or at least from his own personal feel, and decided on that for those very reasons. So game number 1 is going to be that very Dude Paladin for Kin, and Odyssey is going to have the Spiteful Priest.
Yeah, with a very, very great opening hand against Dude Paladin in particular. Not only do you have early game minions to stifle pressure, but you have the all-important Dustbreaker, which will be getting another dragon to activate off of it using the Nether Spite Historian. So Kin, I think, went for the full keep there, just having the solid 1-2-3 curve.
Yeah, and Dude Paladin doesn't curve out quite as well as, say, Murloc Paladin, but where it differs from that deck is it's got a ton more reload, and it also has a ton more just sort of threats out of nowhere,
yes,
I suppose, because that hero power just has so many ways to be buffed up with Lightfuse Stegodon, with Level Up with Sunkeeper Tarim, and you can really make it tough for your opponent, especially with Steward of Darkshire, to remove things, because if you give everything Divine Shield and then buff it up, it can make for some tougher roads. But Kin will have Direwolf Alpha to be able to clean up this Northshire Cleric.
Yeah, we were talking about how compared to Murloc Paladin, Dude Paladin might have a weaker turn 1-2-3, but they have more consistent refill and reload mechanisms. So the trade-off is that they might have a harder time dealing with early boards, and Odyssey with the top deck of Northshire Cleric on turn 1 is gonna give Kin the absolute hardest time dealing with an early board, and now he's free to develop the Nether Spite and have the Dustbreaker ready at any time.
Yeah, if Odyssey hadn't picked that up, he would have had a real thought about coining out one of his 2-drops.
Yeah.
Probably Nether Spite Historian, which would have delayed Dustbreaker, but now he can play a 2-drop onto and perhaps even coin out Dustbreaker if he feels like the board is big enough. But in general, he can just curve a little bit better and go 2-drop into 3-drop into 4-drop instead of having to disrupt that flow with the coin.
Right. It seems like Odyssey is more concerned with being able to contest the Direwolf Alpha straight on, thinking that he's probably not going to need to coin Dustbreaker yet, which I can understand because aside from the 2 Dustbreaker, that's actually your only convenient way of dealing with wide boards from the Paladin. And as we mentioned, they can go wide over and over again. So the timing of when you play the Dustbreaker is actually really crucial in the matchup.
But Steward of Darkshire does throw a wrench in this plan. I think Odyssey was hoping that he'd be able to throw out this Tar Creeper and have it be able to contest, which it does. But he has to think about, well, what if Kin reloads with minions that have Divine Shield? Then all of a sudden Dustbreaker isn't as effective, and wow, okay, completely deviates from that plan and goes with just Nether Spite Story, and I guess he needs the dragon, and that's a little bit more why I'm surprised that he didn't go with this last turn, because that opened up just more opportunities for him to be able to play.
Yeah, also having seen the Steward of Darkshire hit the board, you're expecting that the whatever comes next from Kin will have Divine Shield, which makes Dustbreaker a lot less effective. But maybe if he's thinking, okay, I really need to kill this Steward as soon as possible, and the only way of doing that is with the Steward of Darkshire, he might be thinking of playing a not-so-efficient Dustbreaker, which is a feels bad man.
I have to say, I probably would have played this early game different if I were Odyssey.
The light protects me.
But I suppose he was just really worried about what the implications would be if he left Direwolf Alpha up.
Yeah.
But if you're going to Dustbreaker anyway at some point in the early game, leaving Direwolf Alpha up is not the biggest deal in the world.
Yeah, I definitely would have preferred to see the Historian. I can get where his mindset was going, but it didn't quite pan out for him. You can also say that because he had seen one Lost in the Jungle in turn 1. Maybe he wasn't expecting the second one, but this is an absolute nightmare board for the Spiteful Priest to deal with.
It's still clear up. The Steward of Darkshire, get rid of these Divine Shields, but
You're just praying there's no level up / Stegodon at that point.
Yep.
And I still think it's the play because everything else leaves up the Steward of Darkshire as a persisting problem, and at some point you're going to have to deal with it. One way that Odyssey might be able to generate another board clear is to discover a Knife Juggler off of the Draconid Operative and then play minions. And that's like the only way of not even conveniently dealing 1 damage because he doesn't have that many cheap minions, but that's his only removal options aside from minion combat.
Yeah. I was also thinking maybe Tar Creeper could be the play that turn and try and peel off some of the Divine Shields and try and bait out some reload and then play Dustbreaker to follow that up. But opposite, just get that priority target off the board. And now Kin does pick up Lightfuse Stegodon.
And things are going to get dicey really quickly. So yeah, I honestly don't see a way out for Odyssey if this Stegodon picks up something to consolidate the board state, and most of the time it will.
Yeah, even Poisonous can be pretty devastating because of the fact that Odyssey, his whole game plan is based around minions. There is no spells in this deck outside of Free from Amber and Mind Control, so there's no removal. There's no board sweeps outside of Dustbreaker. And now there's only 2 more maximum that can come out because that was a natural Dustbreaker. Another Spy Historian didn't pick up a second one. So just the fact that Kin doesn't have to worry about too much removal for a while, at least from his perspective, then you feel like he's in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, so I guess from Odyssey's perspective, since he wasn't able, I assume the Knife Juggler wasn't in the options. Actually, if he picks up a Knife Juggler off the second Draconid Operative, he can pair it with the Stand Against Darkness, and that could be one way of clearing the board. But that would assume that Kin is not able to gain health or Divine Shields on these Silverhand recruits. So I expect this to be some sort of Stegodon turn one way or another.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe you could quality, but a quality is such a big tool for later on, especially with turn 6 coming up. Maybe a Spiteful Summoner with the coin would have come out last turn, but that's always going to be a possibility in big, big threats. Or it's going to be a possibility, and Kin picks up +3 attack. One of the good options, and now the big question is, does he cash in on these now or start hitting Odyssey in the face and make the read that there's not another Dustbreaker?
I feel like you can afford to play around Dustbreaker a little bit, so maybe trade one of the 4 ones into the Operative, and then the rest goes face.
I'm going all face.
All right.
If he doesn't have Dustbreaker, this sets up for a lethal.
Yeah.
Almost guaranteed, especially with Vine Cleaver being an extra 4 damage coming from hand. So Odyssey does not find it and does not find a way to really shore up this board state. Could flip one of the attacks with Twilight Acolyte and try and block some damage with Tar Creeper and clear off a good amount.
Yeah, if he goes for that play and then trades off your Argent Protector and one of the 4 ones.
14 damage total on the board, 18 with Vine Cleaver.
And yeah, it's still enough even to get through the Tar Creeper and still have lethal. So that's just going to be it.
Yeah, I don't see any other plays. There's nothing.
If he discovers Argent Protector with the Operative, yeah, it's still not enough. And that's just the power of Dude Paladin. I mean, a lot of the times you look at this board and it looks so fragile, but because of the nature of a lot of the decks in the meta, like Spiteful Priest and Secret Mage, they just don't run enough removal, if any at all, for even tiny health minions.
Yeah, so that is lethal presented on board, I do believe. It's 13 damage, and a quality also gets the job done.
Yeah, many ways of doing this. So Kin gonna get up to a 1-0 lead. And Odyssey, I don't think he can say he was expecting to be able to get a win against the Dude Paladin.
Yeah, whichever one he didn't ban between Secret Mage and Dude Paladin, his lineup was going to struggle with. So he sort of just had to pick the lesser of, or the greater of the two evils from his perspective, I suppose. And so now he has to rely on the strategy that he's built his deck around, which is to try and target that Warlock.
Yes.
And he does have the tools to do it, but Warlock being one of the best decks in the game, it's really hard to get to a point where you can beat it 3 times in a row if your other decks just don't do well against your opponent's lineup.
Yeah, that being said, Odyssey shouldn't feel too bad about losing to the Dude Paladin because, as we said, he was probably expecting it at some point. But now he really has to focus to be able to get the wins against the Warlock because, as we kept comparing, it's kind of similar to, not in strategy, but in dominance in the meta as Razor Priest in the last meta, where it's like a lot of people, because it's been so popular in every tournament meta, have been trying to figure out the lineup to try and target it, but it never really quite pans out because the Warlock can still draw into some sort of win condition, and even the bad matchups are not that heavily unfavored.
Warlock is great at doing broken things, and there's not many decks that can beat broken things 3 times in a row. Even if you have even matchups, like even if you have a 60% matchup, I believe the math was, which is in Hearthstone is incredibly favored, like having that 10% swing, you still aren't favored to win 3 times in a row.
Yeah, you still have to hit the...
Yeah. In order for you to consistently beat a deck 3 times in a row, you have to be around 85% favored against that one specific deck.
I don't think there's been a matchup like that in a long time. Maybe like Control Warrior versus Freeze Mage.
Yeah.
And nothing else comes to mind. So Odyssey gonna start off with the Quest Rogue, and Kin, recognizing that his Warlock is the one being preyed on by Odyssey's lineup, is saving it for last. And heading off with the Spiteful Priest here. He is running Lich King, which is kind of a greedy inclusion. Probably not gonna have the time to play it against Quest Rogue.
Yeah, and Quest Rogue is actually favored against this deck. There's not huge sample sizes because there's not too many people playing Quest Rogue. But from players that I've talked to and seen talking about this deck, it is favored. Because a lot of times you make these giant board states and you have no spells and not a huge amount of reload in the fact that you just flood the board with a lot of small minions.
That's true.
So Vanish can really punish this type of strategy. It's like hard removal that kind of works also in favor of Quest Rogue, because a lot of times you want to be able to just reload with cheap stuff that are 5/5s later in the game. So it's going to be up to Kin to sort of put on a lot of pressure early and dodge the Vanish at all costs, because he is on a definite clock against Quest Rogue.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Because the Spiteful Priest tends to go tall rather than wide, Vanish can be pretty punishing because it's difficult to reload on the same mana cost that it took to put all those minions on the board in one turn. And also, the 5/5 health cutoff means that it's only double Duskbreaker that consistently can deal with these things. And the addition of Sonya in the new meta means that Chargers are just so powerful in completing quests early.
Yeah, that's why decks still run South Sea Deckhand despite not running patches because of the patches change. That's why they still run Stone Tusk Boar. That's why they're including now Bluegill Warrior in a lot of Quest Rogue decks, because they just want more Chargers, not only for Sona Shadow Dancer, but just to finish games against control decks that much quicker.
And awkwardly enough for Kin, the only way he can deal with this Sonya is to expend a Duskbreaker right now, but I'm thinking that is a priority target.
Yeah. Odyssey is running the more classic version of Quest Rogue with Fireflies and Igneous Elemental, as we saw in the opening. So it doesn't have, some of those cheap 0 mana plays, doesn't have Bluegill Warriors. Just going for the sort of standard consistency of finishing the quest.
Yeah, this is, I don't want to say insane, because maybe Kin felt like the Duskbreaker wasn't good enough there. He had to maybe hope that there was no Charger in hand, but I mean, leaving that up means that the quest is nearly done already.
Yep, and Odyssey still gets that final Stone Tusk Boar back in his hand.
Yeah.
So going to be able to complete the quest and start getting the ball rolling. Is missing Prep and is missing Vanish, though. And those are two of the big sort of swing/tempo cards that you need to solidify your place in the game. Because at this point, he's going to have to spend an entire turn developing the quest. And that gives Kin that one opening to develop a big board that can try and contest. But then once that quest is complete and played,
No
all bets
openings
are
are
yeah,
left.
there
at all.
are no openings, and this is not looking good for Kin.
Yeah, I mean, Kin missing out on maybe an early board like Cleric plus Shadow Ascendant really hurt him in being able to at least slow down the quest completion from Odyssey there. And I question leaving up the Sonya. And because, yes, it's an 8-4 on board, but it's not going to be enough damage to get through once the quest is completed, especially with Wax Elemental being a very annoying roadblock.
You have to attack into it twice as Spiteful Priest. There's no way around it, basically.
I guess the Song Stealer would be the only way.
Song Stealer, yeah. Or Mind Control.
Sure.
Or Grand Archivist into land the Mind Control. So that is about the only way. And now this is kind of tough. Kid knows that the quest is going to be able to be completed next turn with the Stone Tusk board plus quest, so feels obligated to clean off this board.
Yeah, the preemptive clear, although it damages your own minion, seems necessary, but I'm thinking it's too little too late. Because once Odyssey takes this slow turn of quest completion, the minions are just going to keep coming. Although the important thing is that after the Stone Tusk board, there's no more chargers left.
But with triple Cold Light Oracle in hand, plus a Novice Engineer, plus bouncers.
Yeah, he's going to run into
yeah,
stuff
even
eventually.
just Glacial Shard can be enough to stifle Kin's turn enough to where Odyssey can strike back. So.
Right, so I'm thinking Kin needs to draw into the Spiteful Summoner off the top of his deck next turn, and then what's the max attack you can put on board? If you get some Mind Control and a 12/12 minion, that's another 16 damage on board, and assuming Odyssey will trade the Stone Tusk into the 8/1, he will have 22. Yeah, plus the Shadow Ascendant buff, so that's something. Barring a huge Spiteful swing, though, I don't think he'll be able to outpace the quested minions from the Rogue. And also, Odyssey has the Glacial Shard and bounces to stall.
That's quite greedy. I understand why, because it trades 2 minions instead of just 1. But you just take more damage in the process. But I suppose the amount of minions on board, since you're going to have a limited amount of attacks, makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely justifiable.
I thought that was this Discover for a second. I was like, ooh, Valsmon's. I always forget with Curious Glimmer.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that as well.
Yeah. Then you realize, wait, Shadow Rager should not be. In games, I've picked the one that I want instead of the one that my opponent has without even realizing.
Well, that's why these guys are on the stage and we're here on the couches.
That's right. If
And
you can't play, cast.
That's right, guys. So, are you liking the triple Glacial Shard this turn?
Well, not anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Shadow Steps picked up.
Yeah, very useful there. Yeah, it seems like just freezing the board, like all 3 of these minions, would be a bit of an overreaction because the Tar Creeper is really not a big threat.
Yeah.
It's only the 8/1 that really merits a freeze here.
Go freeze, Firefly, Flame Elemental, then Shadow Step the Flame Elemental, play it again, and play another Firefly. That would be the maximum amount of 5/5s that can come out this turn, I believe.
Seems good.
But opting to draw cards instead, always a viable path, and can still get 4 5/5s on this board to get the train rolling.
So is Kin able to use this Vanish to his advantage in any way?
I do not think so.
Yeah.
I think that works against him.
Yep.
It might save him for a turn down the line, but that's all it will do is save him for a turn.
It's literally just prolonging the inevitable.
That's right.
Because it takes too much mana for him to be able to pair any significant board minions to play on board after the Vanish, and Odyssey's easily able to reload because his minions are so efficient. So is there lethal potential here?
So he can push 10 damage through on board. It would cost 3 mana to get 5 additional. Actually, it would only cost 3 mana to get 10 additional.
Because
and
of the
then
shadow step?
He would need 6 mana to be able to do 10 additional damage. So 1 mana off, I believe.
Yeah.
Being able to kill this turn. He'd do 25 maximum damage, but that would leave the whole board up. And if you don't have lethal, you might as well just keep playing for the board.
Yeah. He is, of course, freezing off the minions to prevent any counter-lethal possibility coming his way from Kin. And yeah, leaving up 6 is not a big deal.
You're not dying.
Yeah.
Even if Spiteful Summoner came out and somebody charged Devil's Store, he would still be safe.
Yeah, the only things you would have to think about are like maybe a silence on the frozen minion, but in this case, silencing the 8/1 would also remove its attack buff, so nothing to be afraid of for Odyssey there.
Well, it's about the best use he can hope for Vanish, because it does kill off some of the minions that were played last.
Still a little bit off for the lack of bounces, but he could easily draw into either more charges or bounces with these cold lights here.
So I believe 3 more bounces left in the deck with second Shadow Step, second Gad's Inferment, and the second Youthful Brewmaster. Could also Vanish, pick up a Vanish because he has the prep available, but...
Yeah. Or you could just take the no need to really think and definitely win next turn play.
Yeah.
Because Kin has absolutely no outs from here.
1 turn away from a Deathwing, even though he hasn't played Nether Sprite Historian, so he knows that that's not available. And he wouldn't be able to, he knows that there was only 1 Draconid Operative card, and it was played last turn, so he doesn't have enough mana to save Draconid Operative and Vanish again.
And I can't help but say it feels like Kin lost this game from the turn he did not clear the Sonya. He was just pretty much helpless.
Yes.
To deal with the quest completion. He didn't have the Spiteful on 6 to maybe mount some pressure in that one window during the turn that Odyssey had to play the quest.
A
and yeah,
futile
that's
attempt.
a very, very one-sided game. So Odyssey bringing it up to a tie here. Definitely feels like the tables were turned, because in the previous game, felt like Kin was the one playing sort of solitaire.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of these two decks when they hit. Not saying that Spiteful Priest is definitely the matchup that Questro wants to hit, but when they're able to get the Sonya and the quest completion early, then a lot of matchups suddenly become free.
And that's a pretty big win for Odyssey, because that means his strategy is that much easier with getting a win against that control Warlock or that Cube Warlock. So it could come down to it. I imagine Kin's going to throw out that Spiteful Priest again. And we might be seeing a mirror, if I had to guess.
Yeah, we could be seeing a couple of mirrors, because again, these players had similar mindsets building the lineup for at least 2 of their decks, but they had a discrepancy in the Warlock archetype and also whether to bring Rogue or Paladin.
I feel like we've seen a lot of Game 5s that ended up coming down to Control Warlock versus Secret Mage, or Cube Warlock versus Secret Mage, so...
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of Game 5s in general throughout the weekend.
We have, yeah. Even the
I don't
first
think
match of
we've
the day
seen-
today.
Have there been any 3-1s? I feel like it's all 0-3 or 3-2.
Well, there was a lot of lower bracket matches that I don't
Yeah, okay,
don't
on
know the
stream then.
reported score. Yeah, on stream, I don't know. We've seen a couple 3-0s and a lot of 3-2s. That's just how closely a lot of these strategies match up. And some of that has to do with many players in the tournament bringing similar strategies.
Sure.
That lends itself to being, you know, a lot of mirror matches, a lot of similar matchups, but on different sides.
Yeah, and the way those similar lineups line up against each other means that, well, if you have one deck that's doing well against your opponent's deck, and they have that one deck that's doing well against one of your decks, you're both going to queue those decks that do well at some point, and they're going to get a win at some point. And a lot of players like to they prefer to play to their momentum and get the decks that are more likely to get a win in, and so that stretches out the entire series a bit longer.
Yeah. So both these players switching up their pick strategy from what is the standard. Of course, it's Conquest pick order, so it's hard to debate because at the end, it doesn't really matter if both players are picking randomly. But generally, if you have one deck that your opponent's trying to target, you try and save it for last because your other decks are going to get quick wins.
Yep.
But Kin said, well, my Warlock is going to have a tougher time, but I want to try and get maybe that Spiteful Priest matchup because I assume that he's going to play Spiteful Priest.
Yeah, it might have a slightly less hard time against the Spiteful Priest than it would against the Secret Mage. And having Skull in hand pretty early, always a good sign. So just being able to draw into a Void Lord would be a huge help. And we see the two Warlock-centric tech cards in Odyssey's hand already, the Potion of Polymorph and the Spellbreaker. And you were saying a while ago that you feel Spellbreaker's a little bit redundant in this list.
Yeah. It just feels like your strategy revolves around getting in as much minion damage as possible before turn 5, before the Warlock can start doing Warlock things. And then the Spellbreaker doesn't really necessarily oftentimes allow you to push through because once it gets to a certain point of the game, your strategy is to kill your opponent with spells. And a lot of times it's a dead card in your hand where you'd rather have that early pressure instead of having Spellbreaker. Like in this case,
Yeah.
he'd rather that be a Mana Worm so he can get in early damage. And by having Spellbreaker, he hurts his hand later. He hurts his consistency of putting on that early damage, which hurts the consistency of killing his opponent with spells once his board is inevitably removed. But I am, of course, as always, open to kind of being shown that I'm wrong. So it could be good. And Ender's had a lot of success with Spellbreaker in his mage as well. So it does have quite a bit of merits when you think of it as, well, if you land a board late game, then yes, it could help you push through. But I feel like it's a risky tech choice.
Yeah, I can definitely see your mindset behind that. I feel like including Spellbreaker kind of needs the precondition of you being able to stick a board past Hellfire. And usually that involves you being able to stick your counterspell to deal with the Hellfire. And Kin there, what I do like definitely is the inclusion of Potion of Polymorph, because aside from it being good to deal with Void Lords, it's also another secret that your opponent has to somewhat play around, and it can confuse somebody. Like Odyssey, I think, was playing it as a bluff there to prevent the Hellfire, and Kin is forced to take it because if his Hellfire gets counterspelled there, then he has no way of dealing with the next board conveniently.
Kin does have a pretty decent hand, though.
Yeah.
Dark Pact is actually, against Secret Mage, one of the highest win rate cards in the opening hand. Which is surprising because you think, well, it doesn't have any impact on the board early on, but you're drawing cards early, usually, with tap with Cobalt Librarian. And Dark Pact is kind of necessary to get you those heals when you need to stabilize around like turn 6, turn 7, turn 8. So if you look at the data, then Dark Pact actually is quite a bit up there as a card when kept in the opening hand, which is pretty crazy to think, because in not many matchups you keep it unless, say, you have the coin and you also have Possessed Lackey. In that case, like you think about it, but it's not something that's on the forefront of a lot of players' minds. And this skull is
Many possibilities.
it would kind of be a bluff.
Yeah.
Because I
No demons
feel
in
like
hand.
Possessed Lackey would be pretty good. Kin may just be thinking that he wouldn't have a good target to Dark Pact because this is not going to pull anything.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the only reason for not playing the Lackey there is in respect of Spellbreaker, so that you can definitely Lackey pack the next turn.
Yeah.
But then that's not in respect of Counterspell.
Yes, and there's 2 counter spells in the deck
And one
Spellbreaker.
Spellbreaker. So it's interesting what Kin chooses to play
Yeah.
around, unless he's predicting that he will be drawing a demon very, very soon. But the way that the skull works, of course, is that the summon effect goes off before the draw. So a bit unfortunate
I
there.
feel like you'd want to pay more respect to Counterspell than
Yeah.
Spellbreaker because of the fact that you also have Arcanologist to pull a Counterspell. So there's way more likelihood that Counterspell is in hand at any point in the game than Spellbreaker, unless you had a hard read that the card in the far left is Spellbreaker. But I understand why. I just maybe think that didn't think through all the things he could play around and tunneled on one specific thing. Maybe that's why Spellbreaker's in there. It's in there for psychological reasons only. Because if you know your opponent has a Spellbreaker, you're gonna make potentially suboptimal plays to try and play around it.
That is next level. But yeah, funny the way things work out there. No counter spell, so Kin is kind of rewarded. And he did draw into a Doomguard, so next turn the Skull will be getting quite a bit of value in. One of these is going to stick for the Faceless / Taldaram. And because Odyssey was not able to have the early curve of Mana Worm, Sorcerer's Apprentice, things like that, and get in the early damage, it seems like he's going to be playing from behind here. Although Alaneth could provide him with some pure burn outs, although, well, with Cube and all of this, it's going to be too much pressure.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
And that is explosive runes.
Yeah, so we're going to get the Doomguard straight away if he goes for it. He did see the Potion of Polymorph already, right? And I think it's a 1-of in the deck,
It
so
is. So
the cube is
either
free.
the cube sticks, but he can't Dark Pact, or the cube doesn't stick and he gets a bunch of Doomguards, and then he's very likely to also be able to Faceless a Doomguard and Prince Taldaram a Doomguard next turn, and put on a ton of pressure.
Yeah, so I guess Kin is just thinking through how bad is it if the cube sticks and I don't get Doomguards right away. Not like he's in a bad spot after this either. And the option for Cube Pact is still live. So now Odyssey, I mean, he'd love to play Alaneth, but he's the one without any minion pressure and will soon be at a lower health total. So even if he draws Burn Spell into Burn Spell into Burn Spell, it's not going to be enough to outpace the Doomguard pressure.
Yeah, the clock is changed at that point.
What he can go for is maybe Firelands onto the Doomguard and get a charge minion or something.
His own Doomguard.
Yeah, to deal with other Doomguard. And then that removes cube possibilities for Kin. Oh, you know what would have been sick there? Despicable Dreadlord.
Ah, yeah. Despicable Dreadlord. But nope, Vermin Sensei it is.
Yeah, now Kin is free to get another 2 Doomguards and sweet 8 health while you're at it. 5 damage to face. Well, 10 with the other Doomguard plus the clear on the 4/5 and smooth sailing for him. I think he's free to tap as well.
Actually, I think you Prince Taldaram your own cube.
Sure, yeah.
And then Dark Pact next turn. And take the 4 damage.
Yeah, I was thinking like take the window while there's no counterspell, but then you have other counterspell procs, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a risky play, but that I think gives you such a high win percentage because you Dark Pact your cube, and then you can Hellfire your Prince Taldaram and summon 4 Doomguards next turn, which is almost guaranteed lethal.
Yeah.
It's the riskier line, but it's kind of interesting to think about. You would take that 4 damage because you would need to go fit. You can't trade in before you... I want to see him Prince this cube. All day, every day.
All agreed.
Because there's no ice block, so you're almost guaranteed to win next turn because you could even lesser Amethyst Spellstone to proc the counterspell. You still have enough mana to Dark Pact and Hellfire.
Oh, did Kin get the... Oh my gosh, he missed an attack there and also a tap, which I think was looking pretty juicy there, so...
Yeah, 29. Difference between 29 and 27. At this stage in the game...
Yeah, I mean, if you go with this line of play, which is less greedy, then I assume that means you want to be tapping into getting... I don't know, Void Lord, Gul'dan to consolidate all these demons, but...
Yeah. You're also kind of playing around Spellbreaker a little bit too, because if your opponent does have Spellbreaker, they can only Spellbreaker either the
cube or the prince.
Cube or the prince, so you're still going to get 2 Doomguards. You might just take a little bit of extra damage, but then also your opponent's Spellbreaker's gone. So at any point, if you draw Void Lord and it gets popped out by the skull, you're in a position. So it's set up an almost guaranteed lethal outside of very specifically Spellbreaker, and even then, he would be very close to having enough damage.
Yeah. So that may have been the window Odyssey. Well, it was the only window that Odyssey possibly could have had, but I don't think the window is wide enough even. He hasn't had the time to play Aluneth.
Yeah, and what was that secret that was played?
Counterspell, I believe.
Okay. So, yeah, it doesn't have lethal this turn because he'd be one off with either Prince Haldoram and Hellfire both 3 damage, but doesn't have enough mana to proc the counterspell with Spellstone, play Prince, and play Hellfire.
I think you'd rather have the Hellfire go off than the Spellstone, though, because it clears 2 minions. Would you rather have the Spellstone there? I guess it keeps your Doom Guards healthy, but... Or maybe he's just not going to play it at all and start... Putting the Mage at 1. Okay, so that means you leave 10 on board and you die to... I don't think there's any combination of spells without Glyph. But then, yeah, since there's no ice block, I guess it's fine.
This is pretty similar because there's not a way that you can clear everything. Even with it would have to be a very specific combination of spells, and if spells are going at your minions, they're not going at your face.
Right,
Probably
or like,
win in the long term anyway.
Or a sick Firelands pull, like a Taunter Charge here could maybe save Odyssey for another turn. It's the only out he has, so it's going to be another Vermintide. What are the odds of that? I feel like we've seen a lot of Ultra Swords, but never 2 in 1 game.
Yeah.
From Spiteful.
And
So
Kin puts his head in his hands despite winning that game. I think he feels like there was the obvious blunder, but also I just think maybe throughout the game, not questionable decisions, but maybe deviations from what a lot of players would do. And maybe he feels that pressure. He himself was indecisive about that one turn, and that caused him to miss an attack with a Doom Guard.
Yeah.
And gave Odyssey a window, but not a big enough window to where he could take advantage of it and swing the game back. But Kin knows that that definitely was a blunder, and he's got to sort of compose himself. And he's got one more win left. And he's moving on to lower bracket semifinals.
Yeah.
So pretty far in the tournament.
I do want to actually say, you said not questionable. I will say that a lot of those plays were questionable, not just because they deviate from the norm, but just because the way the numbers line up. Yeah, you said 2 counter spell to play around, but only 1 Spellbreaker, and yet he chose the other play. And then I think he might have been too caught up in his own head thinking about whether that was the right play, and that had this domino effect leading into a strict misplay that nobody can question. It's an objective blunder to be able to miss an attack and a tap there.
Yeah.
So I feel like that might be a sign of inexperience on the big stage, which is nothing you can fault newer players for. But if Kin wants to be able to move on in the lower bracket, then he really needs to get his head in the game here.
Yeah, and of course the possibility of getting almost guaranteed lethal. But he probably felt like he doesn't want to take minion damage, because that's like what you get caught up in is, oh, I got to not take minion damage because then my opponent can be burned. But he had so much time. He was ahead on board. But again, he's going to have a little bit of a moment to take a breath and relax before we get into that 4th game, what could be the final game. In the meantime, we're going to have to go to a very short break. But don't go anywhere, guys. More Sydney Tour stop action right after this.
The Sydney HCT stop is proudly supported by McDonald's Australia.
struggle with, expecting a Warlock ban from his side, but instead opts to ban the Secret Mage away from Kin.
Yeah, I find it pretty interesting. Just by eyeballing the list, it seems like most of Odyssey's lineup would struggle against the Dude Paladin, especially that mage he's got. And the Quest Rogue as well would struggle against that kind of aggressive deck. But I guess you could say the same for Secret Mage, but I do feel like with what's left of his lineup, he would have a slightly better chance against Secret Mage than he would against Dude Paladin. So
yeah, Secret Mage will beat up on Quest Rogue more than Dude Paladin would, I feel. Secret Mage is one of the hard counters to Quest Rogue.
Yes.
But against the rest of his field, I feel like the Dude Paladin would be better. But it's hard to say, and it's very close. And I'm sure that Odyssey probably did the math with his matchups, or at least from his own personal feel, and decided on that for those very reasons. So game number 1 is going to be that very Dude Paladin for Kin, and Odyssey is going to have the Spiteful Priest.
Yeah, with a very, very great opening hand against Dude Paladin in particular. Not only do you have early game minions to stifle pressure, but you have the all-important Dustbreaker, which will be getting another dragon to activate off of it using the Nether Spite Historian. So Kin, I think, went for the full keep there, just having the solid 1-2-3 curve.
And Dude Paladin doesn't curve out quite as well as Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sydney Tour Stop, proudly sponsored by McDonald's Australia. I'm TJ, joined by Gia, and about to jump into game number 4 between Kin and Odyssey here in the lower bracket. The winner of this match goes on to face Ghost in the lower bracket semifinals. So moving along quite nicely in the tournament, and it's been kind of a tough road for these guys. Fighting in the lower bracket is a rough thing to do.
Yeah, and the nature of double elimination, the earlier you lose, the more games you have to play. And for those of you who are just tuning in, Kin is up 2-1 against Odyssey, but we did see some very questionable play from him in the last game when he was playing Cube Warlock. So it's up to him to kind of just shake it off and then play with more finesse in this game, although he should be feeling pretty good because that Cube Warlock was what Odyssey was trying to bully, and now Kin's got it out of the way, so he only has to win with a Spiteful Priest.
And we're going to see a Spiteful Priest mirror, and this one's all about getting that early curve and getting those swing turns with Spiteful Summoner, and currently I see one Spiteful Summoner.
And I see one guy with early curve.
So it's a battle. Which one wins, early curve or Spiteful Summoner?
Well, I guess curve
You have to make a definitive statement of which one's better.
And we can obviously tell that from a 1-game sample size.
That's right. So which one is it?
The way things are panning out, I think I like Kin's chances because he has the 1 into coin 3 and 3. And that's a board that even a Duskbreaker draw can't fully clear. Turn 6 is still quite a ways off. Yes, Odyssey can play Tar Creeper to kind of stifle the pressure, but Kin has quite a bunch of time to draw into his own Spiteful Summoner as well, while getting the early board advantage.
All right, so your answer is early curve. If Kin loses,
then I am a completely non-credible source.
That's right.
Because I made a generalization after 1-game sample size.
That's right.
But Kin drew the Spiteful, so I'm liking my chances.
But he uses coins, so his is going to come second, and Odyssey's going to have attacker's advantage. Oh, this is risky. Drawing cards.
I like it.
Just risky because if he picks up all of his spells off of these cards that he draws, then Spiteful Summoner's deactivated, but
sure, but he
very
hasn't had
unlikely.
Okay, Dustbreaker drawn for Odyssey, but it's not online yet. I feel like the Nether Spite is a necessity this turn so that he'll be able to play Dustbreaker to clean up at least a few minions the following turn for the safest Spiteful he can get on turn 6.
And Odyssey draws both of his free from Ambers, so that means his Spiteful Summoner, unless he draws them back to back, will be able to pull up Mind Control, which means guaranteed a 10 mana minion, which sometimes is not even as good as an 8 mana minion.
Yeah.
Generally, 8 mana minions have more powerful effects, but are smaller bodies.
Yeah, the stats on the 10 cost minions are on average higher, although the discrepancy on those is huge. Can go from 6/6 to 12/12, so essentially one outcome can be twice as good as the next.
And the 8 drops can go from the, what is it, Silver Vanguard?
Yeah, like a 3/3 or
A
something
3/3
abysmal.
to a Tyrion, which is incredible, because you get a weapon, which is about the only removal that the deck can have. And Kin has... Some players opt to run 1 free from Amber and 2 Mind Controls. But both these players have the double free from Amber, double Mind Control for that consistency.
Yeah, I kind of like that build better as well.
Reduces the likelihood that you get punished by drawing your spells early on.
So Ken here has to have Operative on his mind for the turn 5 from Odyssey. Perhaps Dustbreaker as well, because he did see the Historian played. So he's thinking about how to trade to make his board the most resilient to Dustbreaker. And he's actually going for more and more draw here. Looks like the Fairy Dragon's going to come out then. And this board is pretty bad to Dustbreaker. I guess there was no way of doing it conveniently. Trading off the board and getting rid of the Tar Creeper while still staying immune to Dustbreaker, so...
It's still pretty good. Cleans up everything but the Northshire Cleric. But because Kin was able to draw a bunch of cards, he's got very good curves for sort of the remainder of the game.
So we'll see if the attacker's advantage is enough to pull Odyssey back in the game. Kin, with his early curve, was able to draw into more resources. But again, this deck of Spiteful Priest is lacking in single target answers before Mind Control can come online. So if Odyssey pulls 12/12 off of the Spiteful, then I might have to eat my words.
Uh-oh, second Spiteful.
Oh my, and you're playing off the one off the top, of course, of course.
All right, well, let's see what it is. Are we going to see yet another Ultrasaur? Yasharaj.
Oh my gosh.
That is one of the best. A lot of big minions still left in the deck, and he already has his Spiteful Summoner, his second one in his hand, so he doesn't have to worry about that power being taken away from his deck.
Yeah, and not only does the Yasharaj effect represent a threat, so does the stats, and Kin is not running the swap Kobold
No.
dude to try and stifle that pressure, so yeah, eating my words commences right now.
There's another Ultrasaur, though. That's the 4th one that's been spawned from a Spiteful Summoner just on stream since we started the broadcast yesterday, so...
Ultrasaur really hogging the spotlight here.
This is... If someone asks me, hey, what is this Spiteful Priest deck?
Oh
What does
my
it do?
gosh.
I'm going to link them to this very game.
Okay.
Because that is insane.
Kin putting his arms up behind his head and probably getting ready for a game 5, because this is insurmountable pressure.
He is very thoroughly dead.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter what even comes from these Yashrajas, because currently Kin doesn't have a way to deal with 2 10/10s. Northshire Cleric, Kobold Scaleman, sure.
All of my words eaten, digested.
Gee, you're no longer a credible source. I apologize.
Maybe it wasn't to begin with.
I put you on the spot.
Yep, so don't expect anything but a bottom right here from Kin.
And you don't mean Twilight Drake.
Yeah, a little bit more to the right.
Kin, we could see from his plays earlier that he desperately tries to find any way out that he possibly can. But there's just nothing. Even Tar Creeper doesn't stop enough damage. You get Tar Creeper heal go up to 18. He'll block 5. There'd still be 19 damage on board. He'd be at 18. So, not enough.
And even if Odyssey's Spitefuls didn't pull Yasharaj, even if they just pulled like Mountain Giants and say the attackers advantage is still not Mountain Giant. Sea Giant is the one that costs 10. I feel like the attacker's advantage still would have been enough to pull him to the win. Maybe it would have taken longer because Kin would have had like those Tar Creepers to stifle that pressure for a few turns that it couldn't stifle from Yasharaj, but the outcome would have been inevitable because Odyssey still had the follow-up, more threats to pile one after the other, and the Spiteful Priest that falls behind will eventually lose, of course.
Yeah. So going to game number 5, and it's going to be Spiteful Priest for Kin once again, which seems like it's been struggling a little bit for him, and it's going to be, I believe, Secret Mage from Odyssey, which is his last deck.
Yeah, Secret Mage, I believe, and we were just talking about this matchup. Feel like it can be pretty even, but it also depends on the build of the Secret Mage because counter spells are quite useless in the matchup. And Secret Mage, if it's able to curve out early Mana Worm on 1, when is that ever bad?
Yeah.
Answer is no. It's never. Well, that's not a yes or no question. The answer is never.
It was rhetorical at first, but then it was you expected an answer, but then you answered it yourself.
Yeah, losing credibility as the day goes on more and more, and that's a Mana Worm.
No spells to couple with it, though, and a pretty decent early curve for Kin. So say Odyssey plays a Mana Worm on turn 1, and Kin plays Fairy Dragon.
Yeah.
You'd have to coin to be able to just contest Fairy Dragon with Mana Worm. So I can imagine everything's going to be thrown away here from Odyssey, just aside from this Mana Worm. Sorcerer's Apprentice can be sometimes a trap to keep. Same with Medivh's Valet. Because, yes, they're early minions, but you'd much rather have, say, a Secret or Secret plus Cabal Lackey / Kirin Mage. Maybe Sorcerer's Apprentice is kept for minion pressure. But I think Medivh's Valet without a Secret and a way to get a Secret out early can be risky. So it's actually a really tough mulligan to decide.
Yeah, I feel like the Apprentice needs to go as well. Although it can be minion pressure, it's only good if your opponent plays Cleric on 1 and then you coin that out. And that still doesn't feel that good because they can just play like the Shadow Ascendant and then buff it out of range. There's just too many things that dealing... Wow, okay, that is some pressure here.
Well, in this situation, having that minion ends up being good. But if there was no minion or an expensive spell picked up, or no Mana Worm or an expensive spell picked up, could have been unpunished for that specific mulligan.
Yeah, and Kin here recognizing that Fairy Dragon's super effective in this matchup because you can't just Frostbolt it away. It is going to eat up a Mana Worm, which I think is a necessary trade because you don't want the Fairy Dragon getting the value trade on the other Mana Worm. And so Kin will have the time to play Nether Spite and try to get to Dustbreaker, although yeah, I guess Talon Priest is just better on paper, just looking at the board.
Well, Frostbolt plus ping kills it, and then you start getting really far behind because you need multiple turns before you can find a Dustbreaker. I actually would have liked to see Nether Spite Historian there. I don't know, that's really hard decision to make, and he made it very quickly, which is the thing that kind of scares me in that situation. Because Dustbreaker, of course, is a class card, so you have more likelihood of discovering it with Nether Spite Historian. And if his Talon Priest got dealt with in any way, he would have no way for 2 turns to deal with a Sorcerer's Apprentice and a Mana Worm, which is a very scary deal.
Yeah, I think part of the thought process there is that even if your opponent doesn't have the Frostbolt ping, just playing another turn like this with the Kirin Mage and a Secret on board and then going face is really problematic for you because you can still only deal with 1 minion at a time, and anytime you let the mage minion stick, you're giving them extra damage. And Kin very, very quickly sticks with his original game plan of just playing the minion curve, even though he had another window to perhaps discover the Dustbreaker. And I think it was a bit of bad recognition of the situation because expecting the mage to play only 1 minion per turn is a tough read to make.
Yeah, it really is. And now he has no time to play Nether Spite Historian, so it's likely that it won't even come out.
Yeah,
so
this is just the game.
He sort of got his only opportunity to try and stifle this early board pressure.
Yeah.
Wasn't offered Dustbreaker, but of course we had no way of knowing that at the time. And yeah, there's
Yeah, it's not to say that Odyssey didn't have an insane draw. He did, especially with the double valet play for easy minion answers while still sticking his own pressure. But yeah, this is just too much for Odyssey to deal with, for Kin to deal with, and Odyssey not quite getting the lethal yet. But it's not like Kin has the leisure of being able to hero power every turn.
He didn't play Cabal Lackey. I don't know if there's any reason to hold on to Cabal Lackey there.
Yeah, me
He's
neither.
used both his Medivh valets, so the tempo out, and you're playing to kill your opponent next turn regardless.
Yeah. I don't know.
He still wins, but I felt like maybe he gave an opportunity for a comeback. If Spiteful Summoner had picked up a taunt, I guess, I don't know. It's tough to say. Either way, he wins, and Odyssey moves on to the lower bracket semifinals, defeating Kin. Despite being down, despite the Warlock getting a win in its first game with a lineup that seems to target it. But turns out his lineup is very good, also against Spiteful Priest. So if he expected that and built his lineup around that, well done by Odyssey as he knocks Kin out of the tournament and moves on to face Ghost.